The Hasbro WWF toy line is my favorite toy line of all time. It wasn't one I grew up with. I was born in '99, these figures ended much earlier in the '90s. Yet, there's just something about them. Granted, I am a huge fan of wrestling, in more ways than one, and I've always loved the earlier generations. I think there's also just the fact that when you get down to it, seeing so many wrestlers together in a unified, distinctive, cartoony style really does just carry a certain appeal. So much so that nowadays, many toy lines have sprung up to try to carry the torch even further. You can get old favorites who missed out on the toy line before and felt like they should have always been there, or people from the Attitude Era, the PG era, or even the current era of wrestling, who now get to stand alongside the giants of years past in that same distinctive style. I adore my retro wrestling figures. And yet, like most fans of any toy line, there's always been that handful of wrestlers that I want so badly in this style, and yet they've not come out yet. So this video, I just want to go into the 10 wrestlers I most want to see done in a retro style. Before I get into that, I just want to clarify a few things for people who may not be aware. When I say the retro style, what I mean is figures made today that are in the style of the 90s Hasbro WWF toy line. Now, the 90s Hasbro toy line has a lot of distinctive hallmarks. There's the cartoony style, there's the action gimmicks, there's the fact that they were all around 4 to 5 inches tall, depending. And those are all things that can be kind of tweaked. Now, every modern style, with the exception of Hasttel Toys, they all have their own unique art styles that would stand out from the Hasbros. However, they do meet certain other criteria. They are all in the scale, they all follow similar body shapes and articulation points, and a handful, specifically the Mattel Retro line, still includes the action play gimmicks. All I want is something that is in the retro style. So that means a toy from a company like Mattel with their retro line, Cella Toys, now Epic Toys, which is a team up with them in figure collections. They were kind of the first ones on the scene doing this outside of Mattel. You have Zombie Sailor Toys, whose figures are far more realistic looking and yet still carry many of the hallmarks of the designs. Hasttel Toys, which just burst onto the scene with their Ahmed Johnson figure and are about to do Men on a Mission figures. And Rush Collectibles, who unfortunately are kind of the odd duck out due to their QC issues. Those are what I would argue are the major companies doing retro figures today. There are, of course, smaller individuals doing these, people who will give you prototypes and you paint up yourself, customs out there, but I'm saying I want these figures done by these companies or a company of a similar stature and size. And I feel like that is the best way to kind of blot out what I mean. Alongside that, to be clear, these are wrestlers who do not currently have a figure in this style. So, for instance, even though I love Owen Hart and want a King of Hearts Owen Hart, he already has a Hasbro from his high energy days, and thus he is not able to be on this list. For that same reason, I wouldn't include, say, Dude Love or Cactus Jack, because we already have a Mankind Mattel Retro. With all that said, I now want to get into the wrestlers who I most would want to see in the style of my favorite toy line. At number 10, it's the only modern wrestling personality on the list because I want the American Nightmare so badly as a Hasbro figure. Cody Rhodes is my favorite wrestler currently active, and he has been for years. I love it when I'm able to get him, Dusty, and Goldust all together in the same style. I keep their Mattel figures together, I keep their Jakks figures together, and right now, you have the Hasbro Dusty, one of my favorite Hasbro figures. You also have the Mattel Retro Goldust. I want a Cody that I can put alongside them. That's all I want. In terms of what I want the figure to look like, I think I'd want him wearing his entrance jacket. I know that's kind of a controversial thing with Hasbro figures. Should they have entrance gear? Should they just have ring gear? The Hasbro line themselves are kind of down the middle with this, so I personally think you should go with whatever looks better. And I think with Cody, having that big American Nightmare jacket is the best look. At number 9, I honestly want to see Alundra Blaze. Alundra Blaze is one of the seminal 90s women's wrestlers, and we already have Bull Nakano, the person who had my absolute favorite feud with Alundra Blaze. It's kind of strange that we don't already have a figure of her, but then again, we don't have many Medusa or Alundra Blaze figures to begin with. I mean, for instance, we only have one Mattel figure of her, I'm pretty sure. Here's a little fun fact for you. The Hasbro Macho Man is the only Macho Man figure currently available that doesn't have a matching Ms. Elizabeth in the aesthetic. The LJN Macho Man has an LJN Miss Elizabeth. The Toy Biz Macho Man has a Toy Biz Miss Elizabeth. The Mattel Macho Mans have Mattel Miss Elizabeths. There's never been a retro style Miss Elizabeth, despite the fact that she is one of the major managers of all time. Now, granted, as soon as that bone-crunching action Macho Man comes out, that will also be a Macho Man that doesn't have a Miss Elizabeth. But this Macho Man has gone 40 years without a Miss Elizabeth. And you gotta remember, in his WWF career, Miss Elizabeth is the single most important other person or motivator for Macho Man. His entire arc as a performer, as a wrestler, as a champion, as a king, as someone on the recovery from his horrible evil deeds, were all spearheaded either due to his love of or hatred of Miss Elizabeth. She is the single most important factor in his success, in his notoriety, in his memorability as a performer during that era. I honestly think that it's a crime that we don't have a retro Miss Elizabeth yet. At number 7, it's going to be someone who I'm probably the only person I need this guy. I want Slick. Slick is one of the best managers of the 80s, and he never gets his proper due because, well, he wasn't Bobby Heenan, he wasn't Miss Elizabeth, he wasn't Jimmy Hart.
Hey guys, this is Ron Bondajon in the editing bay. As it turns out, I was incredibly wrong. Zombie Sailor Toys is actually including Slick in their Wave 3 alongside a one-man gang. Looks incredible, by the way. I'm putting pictures up. I can't wait to pre-order that figure. But that kind of makes number 7 null and void right now, because part of my rule was you couldn't be someone who already had a figure, and Slick has a figure coming out, so that feels like a really weird gray area. I'm leaning on it doesn't count anymore. So, I don't really know who to put here. I'm just gonna say Gorilla Monsoon. Why not? Gorilla Monsoon, very important commentator, very well-beloved guy. I think people would buy him. Go with it. Number 7's Gorilla Monsoon now.
I'm cheating for the next one just because it's technically 2 people, but I think they're joined at the hip and they absolutely should be made together. Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard, the Brainbusters. It's kind of ridiculous that the only member of the Four Horsemen with a retro-style figure is Ric Flair. I absolutely need at least an Arn Anderson in my life, but I think Tully also needs a retro figure, and I think this would be a great 2-pack. Number 5 is definitely a pet favorite, but it's also one I'm amazed they haven't done yet, just because this guy's been around for so long, and quite frankly, he's always had a pretty good relationship with WWE and Mattel. I want a Ron Simmons. Now, of course, I would go for like APA Farouk, but what I really want is WCW Ron Simmons, World Champion Ron Simmons. This is a figure where this might be considered a cheat, kind of like Arn Anderson, because we do technically have a Galoob, but the Galoobs, even though they fit the aesthetic, I don't personally count them with the retros. I think that they are a very fun, adjacent toy line that can work as a replacement, but this isn't the style that we want. This isn't the type of figure, the type of gimmicks that we want. The Galoobs are great, I love the Galoobs, but they really are their own thing. I want a Ron Simmons in the Hasbro style, and I think it would be phenomenal. It'd be even better if you could potentially get Bradshaw involved and then you could do an APA 2-pack, but honestly, Once again, what I'd rather have is Ron Simmons and Butch Reed do a Doom 2-pack. That would be phenomenal. But at the end of the day, I could take a Butch Reed, I could take a JBL. What I want is a Ron Simmons. Number 4 is another big pet favorite of mine, and it's Rob Van Dam. I'll be honest, I almost kind of hesitate to put this guy on here, not because I don't like Rob Van Dam, quite the opposite, I adore him, but there's something really weird about seeing ECW guys as Hasbros. It could just be because when I think of the Hasbros, I think of the glitz and glamour of the 80s and the goofiness of the new generation. ECW runs so against that I almost think there's like a weird kind of mental dissonance. But at the same time, you had Zombie Sailor, who gave us that wonderful Sabu, and there's other hardcore wrestlers like Nick Gage who already have Hasbro style figures. So I think Rob Van Dam, aesthetically and in terms of personality, definitely works. And unlike Sabu or Nick Gage, with RVD you also have an ocean of colorful, iconic, memorable attires that you could pull from. He has potential to being one of the single most captivating and eye-catching Hasbro style figures ever made, and I think that the name value alone carries some cred. RVD, by most people's estimation, is kind of the guy to come out of ECW, at least those final few years. And I think that his WWE career, his TNA career, his great showings recently in AEW, all just bolster the fact that RVD could move that needle if you got him a figure. We are in my top 3 now, and I'm cheating again, I'm sorry, and it's even worse than last time. I really want the Midnight Express as a Hasbro style set. I want a Jim Cornette, I want a Bobby Eaton, I want a Stan Lane, and I want a Dennis Condrey. If I had to choose, I would prefer the Stan Lane variation of the team if we could only get him or Dennis, but I want all 4. And I know that FTC is putting out a 4-pack now that's going to have all 4 of them, but one, those are Jack style figures, and 2, they're probably not going to be great because FTC is typically not great. I think that since Jim Cornette and the rest of the Express seem to now be interested in putting out more figures, potentially, have them reach out to a Zombie Sailor or to a Hasttel or to a Cella, because these are one of the few groups where I can tell you right now I don't think Mattel's taking them back, and make a 4-pack. I know Jim Cornette is unbelievably controversial, especially these days with modern wrestling fans. I'm not saying I agree with the things he says about modern wrestling. I don't agree with most of the things he says. But at the end of the day, you can't deny he is arguably the greatest manager of all time. And I honestly think the Midnight Express is the best tag team of all time. I think that they are criminally underrated in the toy game. And it's very strange that we've gone this long without them being represented, because the Hasbro figures occupy the timeline in which the Midnight Express were at their absolute career zeniths. For all those reasons, I think they'd be a phenomenal group to get together. At number 2, there could only be one guy, The Body. Jesse the Body Ventura needs a Hasbro style figure. I think it would be great if we could get him as announcer Jesse with his crazier outfits, but at the same time, I would take any type of Jesse Ventura. I think that he is one of the seminal parts of the 80s rock and wrestling era, the golden era. Like, you don't have Hulk Hogan, you don't have that level of popularity, that level of fame, without having Jesse's voice talking about the action. I think that it's almost criminal there's not been a Jesse Ventura yet. At the same time, Jesse seems like the kind of guy who may not be interested in having his likeness for action figures go out there. But I also feel like out of everyone on this list, Jesse and my number 1 are the 2 that absolutely would have the most people interested in them. And I also feel as though Jesse Ventura, for as much as people these days may have forgotten about him, really was a centerpiece of the WWF during their highest point before the Attitude Era. Finally, there's my number 1. And I know I've been using the phrase "this is criminal" a lot. This is actually ridiculous to me. We don't have a Bobby the Brain Heenan. I know that everyone talks about how Bobby the Brain Heenan was the greatest manager of all time, and I'm going to echo it. He's the greatest manager of all time. He is the main antagonist against Hulk Hogan during Hulk Hogan's hottest run ever. I understand why he's not in the Hasbro line. Hasbro didn't do managers. But nowadays, you go to Mattel, you go to Cella, you go to Zombie, you go to Rush, you go to Hasttel, we're getting managers. Let me break something down for you real quick. We are going to have a Jimmy Hart, we are going to have a Paul Bearer, and we are going to have an Oscar from Men on a Mission. And those are going to be managers that are in the Hasbro style, and they're all going to be out before there's even a whiff of a Bobby the Brain Heenan. And I'm not trying to diminish Paul Bearer or Jimmy Hart. Jimmy Hart is my favorite manager of all time. Paul Bearer, absolutely, he deserves to be there too. But honestly, Oscar before Bobby the Brain Heenan. And you might ask yourself, well, what would you even put with Bobby the Brain Heenan? Okay, let's say that this is Mattel that puts Bobby out, right? Because I think they still have his likeness rights. You could do a 4-pack. Had that 4-pack be, I don't know, Andre the Giant, Mr. Perfect, and another member of the Heenan family, maybe the Brooklyn Brawler. Or you could go a very different route. I think this is the way you should do it. Do a 4-pack and have it be Bobby the Brain Heenan, Gorilla Monsoon, Howard Finkel, or Sean Mooney, one of those two, and then announcer Macho Man. Because obviously we can't do Jim Ross anymore because Jim Ross with AEW. But Bobby the Brain Heenan did have an announce team with JR and Macho Man, so you have the connection there. You have the fact that he would constantly antagonize Sean Mooney and Howard Finkel both, and plus, ring announcer, backstage interviewer, those kind of go with the commentators in terms of the mind space. That makes sense. And we already have a Mean Gene Okerlund, so we can't use him again. And then, of course, Gorilla and The Brain are the greatest commentary team of all time, rivaled only by JR and Jerry the King Lawler. I really think that you could make a set like that and it would work. I think that you could put him in any set you wanted to and it would work. Give him a member of the Heenan family. Make a new Andre the Giant. Make a new Mr. Perfect. Bobby the Brain Heenan. More so than Jesse the Body Ventura. More so than the Midnight Express. More so than Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard. This is someone who helped define what the WWF style was. He was their most important manager. He was their most important commentator. He was one of their most important personalities. He was a guy who was so popular, he got his own talk show. Bobby the Brain Heenan needs a Hasbro style figure. Well, there we are. These are the 10, well, not really 10, more like 15 wrestlers or performers who I most want to see in the Hasbro style. Like I said, this is my favorite toy line. It's my favorite thing to add to. I am over the moon that we're just swimming in an ocean of people coming out. That said, these are the guys who, if tomorrow pre-orders went up and I found out that they were making even one of these people, I would just be unable to contain my excitement. I adore this style. I adore this aesthetic. And I'm thankful it's come back. Mattel, they brought back their retro line. They made some missteps, but nowadays their 4-packs are on point. We're getting so many performers from so many different companies that are all so amazing looking. King Kong Bundy, King Haku. We're getting a Paul Bearer. We're getting a Vader. We're getting a China. We're getting the DX. We're getting NWO. We're getting Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks and Adam Bomb. We're getting Danhausen and Nick Gage. We're getting Matt Cardona and Zack Ryder. We're getting so many modern people. We're getting so many classic people. We're getting so many individuals from the 90s and early 2000s. I love that this collection just keeps getting to explode. It just keeps getting to grow. It's the best I've felt as a collector in a very long time. It's the most excited I've been as a collector in a very long time. And every time I see Epic or Mattel or Zombie Sailor tweet about a new person they're working on, I just can't wait. So, I hope this video finds you well. I hope you enjoyed watching it. And hey, maybe you can be on the lookout for some of these figures too.